The arena of chains and steel. The roar of the crowd thundered through the colossal stone corridors of Zoros Arena. The echoes vibrated through the metal walls, pulsing like a heartbeat in the ancient Colosseum. Spectators from countless star systems filled the viewing platforms, their eyes locked on the spectacle below. From the private skyboxes, high-ranking officials of the Galactic Dominion observed with disinterest, sipping exotic liquors while placing wagers. Blood was entertainment here, and no one expected mercy. In the shadows of the highest tier, Thorn adjusted the hood of his cloak, his gaze narrowing as he scanned the scene unfolding beneath him. The scent of sweat, rust, and ozone filled the air, a familiar cocktail of violence and oppression. This world, where barbarism masqueraded as justice, had become a feeding ground for the elite's cruelty. His focus locked onto the center of the arena, where a single figure stood bathed in harsh white light. A woman. Even from this distance, her violet skin shimmered like polished obsidian under the glare of the artificial suns above. She was tall, slender, yet strong, her stance betraying no weakness, despite the chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles. The shackles were old-fashioned, a symbolic restraint rather than a functional one. Whoever she was, the captors wanted her humiliation to be as much a spectacle as her defeat. Thorn had heard rumors, whispers of a Zalan diplomat who had tried to negotiate her people's freedom, only to be betrayed and captured by the very government she sought to reason with. A fool's errand. He had seen it happen too many times before. A deep, synthetic voice echoed across the Colosseum, vibrating through the stands. Behold, the fate of those who dare defy the laws of progress. The speaker was a hologram, towering over the stadium with aristocratic arrogance. Prince Korinos. His pale, cruel face filled the sky, his eyes glinting with amusement as he gazed down at the condemned. This Zalan thought her station as an ambassador would protect her, that her voice carried weight. But today, she learns the true weight of her actions. She learns the cost of defiance. The gates beneath the hologram groaned open, and the arena trembled. A beast padded into the circle, its low growl sending a ripple of excitement through the crowd. A lion. But not just any lion. This one had been altered. Cybernetic implants glowed beneath its golden fur, mechanical enhancements fused into its muscular frame. A relic from Earth, taken, experimented on, and turned into something monstrous. The creature's eyes burned red as it scanned the arena, hunger twisting its features. Thorn felt his jaw tighten. The crowd roared, anticipating the inevitable. Prince Korinos' voice cut through the excitement. Release her bonds. Let her fight for her worthless life. Let her entertain us one last time. With a metallic clank, the chains fell from the woman's wrists and ankles. She remained motionless for a moment, assessing her situation. There was no panic, no desperation, only cold calculation. The lion circled, its augmented muscles coiling, preparing to strike. Thorn exhaled sharply. He had seen enough. He moved swiftly, brushing past the guard's position near the balcony's edge. With one fluid motion, he vaulted over the railing. Gasps erupted from the crowd as he plummeted toward the battlefield, twisting midair before landing in a controlled crouch. The impact sent dust swirling around him. Silence. The lion hesitated, snarling as it reevaluated the new intruder. The woman, too, had turned, her piercing eyes locked onto him with open curiosity. Thorn straightened, his hand dropping to the hilt of his blade. Unlike the arena's usual combatants, he carried no energy weapons, no firearms. Instead, a single sword hung at his hip, an ancient weapon in an age of plasma and particle rifles. He unsheathed it with a slow, deliberate movement, the steel whispering as it met the air. By the laws of the arena, I claim the prisoner as mine, by right of combat. His voice carried through the silence, unwavering, daring anyone to challenge him. The crowd erupted into chaos. Prince Korinos' hologram flickered, the composed mask slipping to reveal his frustration. Who dares? I am Thorn. The name rippled through the Colosseum like a shockwave. Even those who had never seen him in person knew the stories. The Alacris Slayer, Death's Shadow, the one who never ran. The prince's fury was palpable. His lips curled into a sneer. "You think you can challenge my justice, mercenary? You are nothing but a barbarian with a blade." Thorn ignored him. The lion lunged. Thorn pivoted, his movements precise, honed by years of survival. The sword sang through the air, tracing a deadly arc. The beast landed, headless. For a moment, silence stretched across the arena as the lion's body crumpled, cybernetic sparking uselessly in the sand. Then, the eruption of voices. Some cheered, others cursed, but none could deny what they had witnessed. Thorn turned, facing the woman. Up close, she was even more striking, her violet skin illuminated by the glow of the fallen beast's mechanical components. "Why?" Her voice was low, melodic, but laced with suspicion. Before he could answer, Corino's laughter crackled through the speakers. Hollow. Forced. "Very well, barbarian. Take your prize. But remember, everything in Zeros comes at a price." The hologram vanished. The chains had been removed, but they both knew freedom was an illusion. Thorn turned back to the woman. "You're free to go." Her laugh held no humor. "Free? In this galaxy?" She gestured at the crowd, their faces filled with hunger, for blood, for violence, for a story to tell. "There is no such thing as freedom for my kind anymore." Thorn sheathed his sword. "Then come with me. Unless you'd rather wait for the prince's next show." She studied him for a long moment before inclining her head. "Lead the way, mysterious champion. But tell me, do you always make a habit of interfering in executions, or am I special?" Thorn exhaled sharply. "You talk too much for someone who merely died. And you're too serious for someone who just made a prince look like a fool." A shadow moved in the corner of his vision. The arena guards. They had only minutes before reinforcements arrived. Thorn grabbed her wrist. "We need to move." As they disappeared into the shadows beneath the Colosseum, neither noticed the small drone hovering above, its tiny red eye blinking as it relayed footage directly to Prince Corino's private chambers. The game had only just begun. The warrior and the chains that remain. The roar of the crowd still echoed in Rena's ears as she followed Thorn through the shadowed corridors beneath Zoro's arena. The scent of sweat, blood, and burning ozone lingered in the air, a stark reminder that death was always just a heartbeat away in this city. She moved swiftly, her body remembering the weight of her chains, even though they had been removed. It didn't matter. She had worn them long enough that they had become invisible shackles in her mind. Thorn's pace was steady, his hand on the hilt of his sword, a relic from an era that the galaxy had long since abandoned. He had saved her in the arena, but she still didn't understand why. Warriors like him didn't act without reason. There was always a price, always a hidden motive. They entered a quiet passageway, its stone walls carved with ancient markings. The dim light from flickering torches painted moving shadows across Thorn's face, making him look even more formidable than before. Rena finally spoke, her voice hushed but steady. "You never answered my question back there. Why did you interfere?" Thorn didn't break stride. "Because I could." She scoffed. "That's not an answer. You risked your life, defied Prince Corino's, and took me with you. That's not something you do just because you could." He finally stopped, turning to face her. His dark eyes held the weight of something she couldn't quite place, something old and worn down, like a blade that had seen too many battles. "I've seen too many people broken by this galaxy. I won't stand by and let it happen again." His words struck something deep within her. She had once believed in justice, in diplomacy, in the hope that things could be changed with words rather than weapons. But those ideals had died long ago, drowned in the screams of her people as they were taken from their homes, their bodies turned into commodities, their voices silenced. She studied Thorn in the flickering torchlight. His face was lined with scars, but not all of them were physical. He carried his past with him, just as she did. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, both of them tensed. Thorn's sword was in his hand in an instant, his stance shifting into one of readiness. Rena pressed herself against the wall, instinct taking over. A group of guards emerged from the passage ahead, their ceremonial spears gleaming. These weren't just any soldiers, they were Corino's personal enforcers, hand-picked and merciless. Their leader, a woman with cybernetic enhancements running down her arms, stepped forward. The prince expected you to run, Thorn. He also expected you to fight. What he didn't expect, her gaze flickered to Rena, was for you to take an interest in his little spectacle. Thorn didn't move. You should tell your prince that his expectations have always been disappointments. The guard's lips curled into a cold smirk. That's why he sent me. Without warning, she lunged. Thorn met her head-on, his sword flashing through the dim light. The first clash sent a shockwave through the corridor, the force of it rattling the stone walls. The other guards moved to engage, but Rena was already in motion. She ducked under a strike, twisting her body in a way that defied expectation. The guard's balance faltered, and before he could recover, she struck his exposed throat with the edge of her hand. He crumpled instantly. Another enemy came at her. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her fingers brushed against his bare skin, activating the biological trait that all Zins possessed. The effect was immediate. His body shuddered, his mind overwhelmed by a pleasure so intense it left him defenseless. A second later, she drove a dagger into his side. Thorn fought with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life in battle. His sword found the gaps in armor, cutting through flesh and metal alike. He didn't waste energy on unnecessary movements. Every strike was calculated, every motion efficient. The cybernetic leader was fast, but Thorn was faster. As she attempted to bring her spear around for a killing blow, he stepped inside her reach, twisting her weapon out of her grasp and slamming his elbow into her jaw. She staggered, but before she could recover, his blade was at her throat. The corridor fell silent. She sneered, her voice trained. "Kill me, then. You know what happens next." Thorn tilted his head. "Oh, I know. You're bait. Corrinos is watching, waiting to see what I'll do." He leaned in slightly, his voice cold. "You can tell him this. I don't play by his rules." With that, he knocked her unconscious with the hilt of his sword. Rena exhaled, her body still tense. That was reckless. Thorn wiped his blade clean. So was jumping into an arena to fight a cybernetically enhanced lion. Seems to be a habit of mine. She watched him for a long moment. He was different, not just from other humans, but from anyone she had ever met. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. Thorn glanced at her. "Good. That means Corrinos won't expect me either." He turned and started moving again, and after a brief hesitation, Rena followed. As they exited the corridor into the lower districts of Zeros, the city stretched out before them. A tangled mess of neon lights, towering spires, and alleyways that swallowed people whole. It was a city where power was bought with blood, and survival was never guaranteed. Rena's pulse quickened. This was it. She had a choice now. She could run, disappear into the depths of the city, find a way off-world, and try to start over somewhere new. Or, she looked at Thorn, at the man who had risked everything to pull her from her chains. The man who had just made himself an enemy of one of the most dangerous figures in the galaxy for no other reason than because he refused to stand by. The weight of her past pressed against her, but for the first time in years, she felt something else alongside it. Hope. She took a deep breath, and she stepped into the unknown. Shadows in the city of chains. The city stretched before them, an endless labyrinth of neon lights and towering structures. The streets below were alive with movement, black market traders peddling forbidden technology, mercenaries whispering about their next job, and desperate refugees searching for a way off-world. Zeros was a city of chaos, built on the backs of those who had nothing while the elite thrived in their floating palaces above. Rena had lived in gilded cages before, but even those had walls. This place had none, and yet she still felt trapped. Thorn led the way through the lower districts, his stride purposeful but cautious. The air smelled of metal, smoke, and desperation. The deeper they went, the less light reached them, swallowed by the layers of towering buildings overhead. "Where are we going?" she asked. "A safe house," Thorn replied without looking back. "We need to regroup before Corinos tracks us." She narrowed her eyes. "Corinos is already tracking us." As if on cue, a distant explosion rocked the district, sending a tremor through the ground beneath them. Screams erupted from the alleys as people scattered like rats. The neon signs flickered as power grids momentarily overloaded. Thorn's expression didn't change. "We need to move. Now." Rena hesitated for only a second before following. The hunter becomes the hunted. They ducked into a crumbling tenement complex, the air thick with the scent of rust and decay. The stairwells were filled with makeshift homes, people who had long since been forgotten by the galaxy above. Rena met the hollow stares of the people huddled in the shadows. She knew that look well. It was the look of those who had lost everything. The enslaved, the abandoned, the ones no one cared to remember. Thorn moved without hesitation, guiding her up the stairs to a rusted doorway. He pressed a sequence of numbers into a keypad, and the door slid open with a reluctant hiss. Inside, the room was sparse. A few crates served as makeshift furniture, and a dim holoscreen flickered against one wall. It wasn't much, but it was secure. Rena leaned against the wall, folding her arms. "This isn't your first time running from someone powerful, is it?" Thorn gave her a sharp look but didn't answer immediately. He removed his coat, revealing a series of old scars running across his arms and shoulders, marks from battles long past. "No," he finally admitted. "It's not." She studied him carefully. "Then why save me? You knew the cost." Thorn sat on the edge of a crate, his fingers absently tracing the hilt of his sword. "I told you before. I've seen what happens when no one steps in. I won't let it happen again." Rena exhaled, her mind racing. "Then what's the plan?" "Because Corinos won't just send guards next time. He'll send death squads. You humiliated him in front of the entire arena. He won't let that go unanswered." Thorn nodded. "I know. That's why we strike first." Rena blinked. "You want to take the fight to him." "That's exactly what we're going to do. The price of freedom." Before Rena could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the room. Thorn was on his feet in an instant, blade in hand. Rena instinctively moved to the side, positioning herself near the shadows. The knock came again, followed by a voice. "It's me." Thorn relaxed, slightly. He moved to the door, input another code, and the panel slid open. A woman stepped inside, her long coat tattered from years of travel. Her dark hair was streaked with silver, her eyes sharp and calculating. She was missing 2 fingers on her left hand, and the scars that lined her face told a story of survival. Rena immediately recognized her. "You," she whispered. The woman's gaze snapped to her expression unreadable. "You know who I am." "Everyone in the Resistance knows who you are," Rena said slowly. "Captain Vale, the ghost of the Outer Rim." Vale smirked. "Guess my reputation still holds." Thorn crossed his arms. "You came." "Of course I came," Vale replied, scanning the room. "You don't make a move like that in the arena and expect me not to notice." Rena's mind was reeling. Vale had been a legend among the enslaved Zins, a rogue captain who had spent years running missions against the powerful elite, freeing those who had been taken. Many believed she was dead. "If you're here, then you know what's coming," Thorn said. Vale nodded. "Corinos won't stop. He'll use every resource at his disposal to hunt you both down. But you already knew that." Thorn didn't respond, but his jaw tightened. Vale's gaze shifted to Rena. "And you. You're the reason he made a spectacle in the first place. I assume you have something worth fighting for." Rena met her gaze without flinching. I was supposed to be a diplomat. I wanted to stop the enslavement of my people. I wanted to make them see us as more than just. She cut herself off, swallowing the bitterness in her throat. But no one listened. Vale tilted her head. People rarely do until they have no choice. Silence settled over the room. The distant sounds of the city hummed beyond the walls, but inside there was nothing but unspoken understanding. Finally, Vale spoke again. If we're going to do this, we do it smart. Corinos has a network of underground facilities he uses for his operations, but his real power comes from his control over the city's security grid. If we take that down, he loses his advantage. Thorn's eyes darkened. And you have a way in. Vale grinned. You're damn right I do. The battle begins. Rena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. For years, she had fought alone. She had tried to negotiate, tried to reason with those who saw her people as nothing more than tools. And when that failed, she had fought for her own survival, clawing her way through a world that wanted to break her. But now, she wasn't alone. She looked at Thorn, at the warrior who had stepped into the arena without hesitation. She looked at Vale, the legend who had spent her life fighting the impossible. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving. She was fighting back. And this time, she wasn't going to lose. The storm before the war. The city of Zeros never truly slept. Even in the deepest hours of the night, its underbelly remained alive, a pulsating mass of crime, desperation, and whispered rebellion. Somewhere within the tangled maze of steel and neon, Thorn, Rena, and Vale sat huddled in a dimly lit safehouse, their next move more than just a matter of survival. It was a declaration of war. Rena sat by a rusted terminal, staring at the holographic blueprints Vale had pulled up. The lines and shapes formed a tangled network of tunnels and data nodes, but one thing was clear. Prince Corino's true power wasn't just in his soldiers or his wealth. It was in his control over information. "This is it," Vale said, her rough voice cutting through the quiet. "This is how we bring him down." She tapped a blinking node at the center of the map. Corinos doesn't just use force to keep control. He has eyes everywhere. Surveillance drones, eye enforcement programs, a predictive algorithm that tells him what a person is likely to do before they even do it. That's how he's always one step ahead. He doesn't just react. He anticipates. Thorn folded his arms. "And you're saying we can break it?" Vale's grin was sharp. "I'm saying we have to." Corino's security AI is housed in an underground facility, deep beneath his royal compound. It's his brain, his most guarded weapon. Take it offline, and suddenly he's blind. No more predicting our moves. No more tracking us in real time. He becomes just another man. Rena leaned closer, her violet skin illuminated by the dim glow of the hologram. "What kind of security are we dealing with?" Vale sighed, rubbing her temples. "The worst kind. Bio-coded access points, automated defense turrets, neural locked doors. And the worst part." She pointed at a narrow passageway leading into the heart of the compound. "Once we go in, there's no backup. If we fail, we don't get out." Silence filled the room. The weight of the plan settled over them like a thick fog. Thorn broke it first. "Then we don't fail." A ghost from the past. Vale smirked. "I like the confidence, but before we get ourselves killed, we need a way inside." She turned to Rena. "That's where you come in, diplomat." Rena frowned. "Me?" Vale nodded. "Corinos might have enslaved your people, but he still sees your kind as valuable. If you were taken alive from the arena, he's going to want you back. We stage a recapture. Let one of my informants sell you back to Corinos. Once you're inside, you disable the compound's internal security long enough for Thorn and me to infiltrate from the tunnels below." Rena's stomach twisted. The thought of walking back into that world, of placing herself back in the hands of those who had stripped her people of everything, it made her sick. Thorn must have sensed it because he spoke before she could answer. "No." Vale raised an eyebrow. No. You're asking her to walk back into hell. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet fury simmering beneath the surface. Rena took a slow breath. Her fingers curled against her palms as she thought about all the time she had been powerless, all the time she had been a prisoner. But this time was different. This time, she had a choice. She met Thorne's gaze. "I'll do it." Thorne's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Vale gave a small nod of approval. "Good. We move at dawn. Bait in a cage." The next morning, Rena stood in the middle of a desolate alleyway, her wrists bound in fake energy cuffs. The mercenary Vale had hired, a man named Drax, played his part well, dragging her forward as if she were just another piece of property. The guard at the compound's entrance barely looked up as they approached. "What's this?" Drax grunted. "Found her in the lower districts. Thought His Highness might want his pet back." The guard eyed Rena, his expression shifting between amusement and boredom. "Corino said she was taken. Seems a little convenient, she just shows up." Drax scowled. "Look, I don't care what you think. You want to check with your boss, be my guest. But I'm not standing here all day while you decide whether or not to make yourself useful." The guard exhaled sharply before turning to the comm panel beside him. "We have something His Highness might want to see." Rena forced herself to stay still, to not let the flood of memories overtake her. Chains, cages, hands grabbing her, treating her like an object. No, not this time. Minutes later, the compound's gates groaned open, and she was led inside. A palace of lies. The interior of Corino's palace was as sickeningly extravagant as she remembered. The walls were lined with gold-trimmed banners, displaying his family crest. Exotic creatures were caged along the main corridor, trophies of his wealth. And then there was the throne room. At the far end of the hall, Corino sat lazily on his throne, his expression unreadable. His holographic crown flickered above his head, a reminder that his rule extended far beyond the walls of this palace. His gaze landed on her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, a slow, calculated smile stretched across his lips. "Well," he said, voice smooth as silk, "look what the gutter dragged back in." Rena lifted her chin, enjoying your moment of victory. His smile widened. "Oh, I will be." He flicked his wrist, and two guards stepped forward. "Take her to the holding cells. I want her processed before I decide what to do with her." As the guards grabbed her arms, Rena risked a glance at the security terminal to her left. The moment they dragged her past it, she acted. Her body twisted, her foot catching one of the guards in the knee. He crumpled instantly. Before the second could react, she snapped her wrists apart, shattering the fake cuffs. A quick strike to his throat, and he collapsed, gasping for breath. The throne room erupted into chaos. Alarms blared. The remaining guards reached for their weapons. And Corino's. He was already reaching for a control panel. "No." Rena vaulted forward, slamming into him before he could press the emergency lockdown switch. The force of the impact sent them both crashing onto the throne steps. He stared up at her, dazed, his arrogance slipping for the first time. "You," he spat. "You think this changes anything?" Rena grabbed the data drive from his belt. "I think it changes everything." She slammed her palm against the nearest console, overriding the security grid. A flicker of static, a moment of silence. Then the alarms stopped. Beneath the palace, in the hidden tunnels, Thorne and Vale saw their chance. Thorne drew his sword. Vale grinned. Time to end this.